Hey, check out this great conversation on shoeing.
Let's use all of the components, right? Let's just throw everything at it, the stuff that we've been trying to build and have other brands take these lines on, but let's put everything into it. And the price will be whatever it is. It's not going to be some novel price point. It's not going to be really about that at all. It's just going to be, hey, we're throwing everything that we can, that we know how to at this shoe, and let's run it.
Hey, welcome back to another edition of the Shoeing Show. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Priest. I'm joined today by Sandi Mines. Sandi, one of the cool things about our job is that we get to kind of survey the landscape of all the great footwear brands that are out there. Some are widely known, and some are emerging, and some have great stories. And today is no different. We have a brand that makes great product, is a brand that sources globally, but also is based here in the United States. And so I'm excited to dive into this conversation. Who is on Shoe and Show today?
Great. Thank you, Matt. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today with Wyatt Gilmore, CEO and founder of Grant Stone. As you said, based here in Michigan, I believe. I'm really looking forward to hearing all about this story, especially because it has some roots with some family footwear, as I have as well. So, Wyatt, welcome to the show. And we'd love to start out by asking you a little bit about your history and like what brought you into the footwear family. What's your shoe story?
Sure. No, and thank you for having me. Yeah. So my story kind of begins with my grandfather. He worked, in the shoe industry for 60 some years. I want to say he originally was he worked maybe at an orthopedic store at a very young age, like in his 20s, which he then revisited later on, trying to have his own orthopedic store somewhere in Connecticut. I don't think it was Norwalk. I think it was probably closer to like Bridgeport. And but he spent 63, 64 years or so at Alden Shoe Company out of Massachusetts. And so that was his that was his life through and through. I think it was basically his whole career was there at Alden. And that eventually kind of led into my dad working there. And when he was in his 30s and 40s. And so that would have been, he probably worked there for something along the lines of like 13 to 14, 15 years, and actually took over one of the territories that my grandpa was working in the Midwest, which is kind of the reason why I ended up, growing up in this area and now still living here. But so he worked there for a long time. And then at some point in the 90s, he started working with a family in Taiwan and China. They were looking to basically kind of break away from the type of construction they were doing at the time, which was a little bit more of a cemented construction type shoes. I mean, more focusing on price point and volume for whatever customer that they were working with at the time. And I think that, that was also during the time where things were changing, where footwear manufacturing in general started to really like disperse throughout different countries in Asia. It wasn't just like when it hit Japan and then kind of went to China. And then at this point, it was mid 90s and going to 2000s. Well, now it was starting to kind of go all over the world. And this factory in general was kind of looking to do something. They want to kind of break away from cement construction in general and try to do something that was a little bit more specific and something that wouldn't put so much pressure on a program that maybe doesn't have the volume. And they could focus a little bit more on the type of product and the construction and try to find somewhat of a niche for what they were doing. And so, they started making Goodyear welted products back in like 1993, 1994. This factory was, and that factory is in Xiamen, China. And fast forward, I was 3-4 years old at that time. So fast forward to me, 19, 20 years old, they kind of gave me the opportunity. At the time, I didn't know what I was going to do, whether that was for school or just career in general. Didn't really know what my next steps were. And my parents kind of just said, hey, well, you have a pretty unique opportunity. We have, our friends over there. And he said you could come check out, first of all, Taipei, and then also go to the factory in Xiamen and just see it. It'd be a great experience, not only from the culture standpoint, but also you go to the factory and kind of see what's going on over there. And so I did that, flew over there, spent a few days in Taipei, and then went to Xiamen to see the factory and basically, spent a couple of weeks there. And the factory owner just kind of posed a question of, hey, well, I mean, would you have interest in trying to do something here? I don't know what that looks like. You could try to learn the language a little bit, the culture, and essentially maybe take on a little bit what your dad used to do at the time. My dad was kind of semi-retired, and you could learn the development side of things, learn the sourcing for materials and everything else, and just kind of get into all things related to the manufacturing with this product. And of course, we're working with American customers, and so I could probably eventually help in that role at some capacity. And so I said sure. Ended up staying there for the few months and enjoying it, and then during this time having these talks, and I said, well, if things are going well, do you want to stay and continue? And I ended up staying there for 8-9 years, working. It just never left. I mean, once I kind of had a feel for it, really enjoyed it. Had my first quote unquote customers a couple years in, and just plus at that age, not having traveled outside the country that much and things, it was just like it was very eye opening. I think that was part of the attraction and the draw as well. It was just so different. And of course, going to China in general, but also that city, Xiamen, being a small coastal island in Southeast Asia, that also helped, I think, a little bit versus maybe going to like Dongguan or Shenzhen or something like that, where it feels very, it's all manufacturing and everything else. Xiamen was pretty well rounded, right? And so it was a nice place to be as well. So yeah, so I mean that was my first job and only job, and 6-7 years in and being in China for a handful of reasons, that continued to be the case. Pricing pressures, the ability to develop lines for customers and hit their price points. Meanwhile, making Goodyear welted shoes became more and more difficult. The product was there, but making something out of China and selling it at a higher price point, it's a tough ask for a lot of these brands to do, right? They tend to take those and maybe go to Lyon or find the 2 or 3 factories that are in North America, in the United States, and try to do something, smaller lines there, and use those for the marketing purposes. And it became difficult. We were doing these good shoes, but the pricing just became more and more complicated for the brands to do that. And while it was still working, it was tough. And we're like, this was when Shopify and a lot of these tools started to become a little more mainstream. They're kind of like plug and play. And so it was like, well, what if we make our own line? You can at least try it. Hey, let's develop our own line, do something real small and simple to begin with, but let's use all of the components, right? Let's use Horween. Let's use Thiele lining from Milwaukee. Let's use Barber welts from Massachusetts. Let's use our leather insoles. Let's use leather outsoles. Let's use cork. Let's use our steel shank. Let's just throw everything at it, the stuff that we've been trying to build, and have other brands take these lines on. But let's put everything into it. And the price will kind of be whatever it is. It's not going to be some novel price point. It's not going to be really about that at all. It's just going to be, hey, we're throwing everything that we know how to at this shoe, and let's run it. I think that, the first order we made like 635 pair and 6 styles. And so I was still in China at the time, and, worked out, basically with a family friend in Connecticut. They were like, hey, if you send them to us, we'll help you ship them. I'm like, hey, it might be like a pair a day or something like that. And they were like, yeah, we can help, in the meantime, while you guys figure things out and try this, venture basically. And so we made the shoes, shipped them to this family friend in Connecticut, the Shoe Mart out of there in Connecticut. And we started to feel things a little bit, especially because, we were building the brand through, I was just basically on forums. The likes of like Menswear Forum, Style Forum, Reddit, Ask Andy About Clothes, just these different little communities for menswear and footwear. And it started to gain traction over the first year or two. And of course, the biggest hurdle was just like, what is this stuff made in China, whatever, But once people started receiving the product and everything else, it just started to change. It took a couple of years, I would say, but it just slowly started to go the direction of, well, actually, yeah, whatever, this thing is incredibly solid. This is a very, very solid product. And just also kind of the way we spec the shoe as far as like the insole thicknesses and stuff, they're pretty substantial, right? It's like a 7-8 pound pair of boots, right? And I think once people start receiving them, they're going online, they're sharing their experiences on forums and everything else. It just slowly started to catch on that actually they're making kind of their own product. The lasts fit well. They're offering widths. They're offering a larger size selection. They're using some fun materials. We started using shell cordovan in our second or third year in business. And there's all those little things like that where people are like, oh, actually, you know what? They're actually doing something a little bit different. And you may not may not be for you, but don't really have to worry about the quality. It's all listed there. This is the components they're putting into it. And so that was kind of how that kind of went for the first few years.
So, Wyatt, let me unpack a couple of the things that you mentioned. One, just for our listeners and our viewers, Xiamen's a beautiful city, and I've spent a lot of time both in Dongguan and in Xiamen. And I will say that it's much more preferable to live in Xiamen. When I tell people who've never been, it's kind of like Miami. It's right on the water. It's beautiful. It's warm. You can look out and see Taiwan just across the water. So it's a great place. If you're going to go to China, like that would be top 3 on my list, because it's industrial, but it's not, as you point out. Dongguan's like nothing but industrial. So I think that was a great place for you to start to build this brand and get the experience, because it sounds like your first job was shoe dog. Like, you out of college, you were a shoe dog through and through. And I think we found, as it relates to product made in China, that when you poll consumers about, hey, where do you want your shoes to come from, the US or Italy or whatever, of course they're going to tell you those premium locations. But when it comes actually, when you deliver quality and value and the things that go into a great pair of boots made out of Xiamen, China, the consumer is all more importantly focused on those things than actually origin. So my question for you is, like, you talked about kind of how in the first few years you started off in China, you started to build a customer base. How do you start to communicate with that customer base? And how do you communicate in today's marketplace, which is super loud and noisy, about what value looks like and what the competitive advantage that you all provide in your boots? You mentioned briefly like sizing and widths and stuff like that, but are there other things that you hone in on when you're communicating with your customer in a very noisy marketplace?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we kind of focus on 2 specific things, but I'll say we definitely, it may not be the right answer, but my feeling on a few items that I try to avoid at all costs is talking about, honestly, cost, price, and value, because I just feel like then you start looking at words like cheap and, well, of course, because it's made in China, and it's like, I don't even want, I try to almost avoid those conversations altogether and go, no, it has nothing to do with it. It's components. We're putting the right components into it. We're using, the right construction, or I should say, the construction we're choosing is good Gibraltar construction. Here's the components, and the price kind of is what it is. And we try to avoid the value and price point. And hey, here we're D2C, so we're cutting this layer out, because at the end of the day, I know we'll never win in a pricing battle with most, and that's not. And I don't think it should be a big draw. And at the same time, they're not cheap. At 435 is our main pricing point. Today, everyone has a different level, of course, of what's cheap and what's not. And I would just say it's definitely not a very competitive price point, generally speaking. And so I almost just go like, let's avoid all that, and just, here's this product, here's how we make it, here's the aesthetic, here's the patterns. And, to your point about, what do we really try to sell? It's the components we're putting into it, the lasts and how they fit, developing the last and the concept behind the last that we end up choosing, as far as, okay, this is where we're going to end up with a ball, and this is where we want the incept to be, and whatever else for our constructions and for our patterns. But then also the sizing is honestly a big part of it. Most of our products that have 42 sizes. So one boot has 42 sizes, one loafer has 42 sizes. It's 6 through 13 DE and triple E. And I think it's not that novel, right? It's not that, crazy or anything like that. But at the same time, there isn't that many options for these people, our customers who wear like a 7.5 triple E. They're like, well, sure, there's other options, but you'd be surprised how few, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want a Chrome Excel, a brown Chrome Excel boot, how many options are there in a 7.5 triple E, or something similar to that? It's actually not that common, right? And so I think that's the other part of it, is just not overdoing it, just sticking to like the fundamentals, sticking to the component story, not doing anything too crazy, but at the same time, offering the sizes, keeping them in stock, trying our best to have a healthy inventory. Yeah.
Wyatt, I think that's really interesting. I mean, they are almost like a custom quality craftsmanship boot and shoe that is just stunning, just on the surface, right? But how are you talking to your consumer? How are you breaking through some of the noise? I'd love to hear about your marketing strategies, your connection, what are you doing for that growth? Because it sounds like you're building a lot and paying so much attention to the quality of the inventory, and the craftsmanship of the product. I'm curious about how you're growing the business.
Today I'm asking myself that same question because it seems harder every year, and so it seems like what we were doing in the past, it resonates, but it's hard to kind of, we started at such a small space that now, even though we're still a small company, a small shoe brand, it's just, of course, harder than it was, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago for us. And this year's our 10th year. Generally speaking, our digital media, digital media marketing, it's pretty straightforward stuff. Most of the time, it's more lifestyle and just your typical, photography and aesthetic, which we have a great team that we work to basically make sure that we're doing this on a weekly basis and we're doing all the right things, at least to our ability. But I think truly what helps so far for us building the brand and everything else, it's honestly almost avoiding the overhyping market jargon and things like that. Like, we're direct to consumer, we're cutting out the middleman. We're using the best materials. It's like, hey, let's not use the word best, and let's not do this and that. If anything, hey, let's do an AMA on Reddit. Let's go in style forum in all these different places. Or, we have Discord groups for Grant Stone. There's Facebook enthusiast groups, whatever. And, if we talk there from a brand perspective, make the best shoes. These, we can say handmade and all this stuff because a lot of it is handmade, but true handmade shoes are bespoke and they're $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a pair, right? That's bespoke, that's handmade. And, I think us as a brand acknowledging those things, but we're doing the best in our ability for making Goodyear welted, ready to wear and pre-order made to order products that we can do. I think people have really, really appreciated that. Our customer appreciates that when they can kind of take what we're saying at face value and maybe go like, well, actually they actually, when they speak, they're also kind of acknowledging the other brands and the other options they're good as well. Right. And there's different products for different price points and things like that versus just like, we're making the best shoes direct to consumer for the best value. It's like, of course, that's not true by any means, and it doesn't really mean anything either. Like, those aren't real words. It's just an opinion and arbitrary, statements and things. So, even when building a meta Instagram ad, it almost, when I'm working with the team, it's like, hey, let's talk about how we have 42 sizes versus we use the best. It's more like, well, if we talk about components, let's say we use Thiele Tannery out of Milwaukee for lining because we've been working with them for 15 years, even before Grant Stone, and they make an amazing glove lining. And North American brands dating back to the 50s and 60s have been using their lining because it's amazing. Like, let's talk about that. Not we have American lining. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, it could be pig resin or it could be PU at that point. It doesn't even mean anything. So trying to kind of focus on that type of thing. And I think it resonates with some people, but at the same time, of course, the people who are doing our ads are like, no one reads this stuff, right? And I'm like, fair, but some do. And those are the same people who are on Discord channels, the same people who are on Reddit who are like, Grant Stone there isn't too much fluff there. It's kind of like they're just making the best product they can. And if you ask them if they have cork or how many millimeter wide their triple rib steel shank is, they'll tell you, right? And so it's just not, it's just like, it's kind of going back to the basics. And I do think that's not going to work forever, and it's not going to resonate with a lot of people, and a lot of people will scroll past it and go like, yeah, whatever. But so far, that's kind of the path we've been trying to take.
I mean, I think human behavior, Wyatt, is that even if people scroll past things, they want to see that those things are still prevalent within, it's kind of like the person who goes to the gym. Like, they may not take advantage of 95% of what's offered, but they love to say, I went to this gym and it's got all these things. And I just looking at your website, one, the aesthetic is unbelievable. The photographies, the shoes are beautiful. A lot of times in the boot world, there's like a hyper focus just on men's or just on women's. And you guys do both really well. And then you have these blogs just about sizing and fit, and the long form story about your grandfather and seeing him, your grandparents with his Navy hat on, he obviously served. And there's just this kind of ecosystem of a narrative that you are controlling. So everyone will engage with that. Some people might read it word for word. Others scroll through it, just see the photos and are blown away. So to me, I think you're really kind of cutting through the noise and doing something different that creates that authenticity. Look, you can go to the big boot companies that make a billion pair and import in and go and easily select, and they only have certain sizes. Or you can go to this emerging brand that's only a decade old, has this heritage assigned to it, and has a great aesthetic. And I think you're checking that box really effectively. So it speaks to me as I go through it. Just the product is beautiful product.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think that's a big part of this story that ended up working for us in our favor. Was since day one, we knew that, based on our price point, people were going to want to know where they're made. And instead of saying imported, which I understand makes sense for a lot of companies and things like that. I mean, it's just, especially if you're using, 7, 8 factories and all over the world, and it's just cleaner and it makes sense for a lot of things. For us, it was like, that's not really going to work for what we do. We have to tell the story and highlight why it's made in China, and because that has to be part of the story. Otherwise, it won't really work, because we're asking a lot of the customer to spend $400 on anything, right? And so, it has to be kind of a cornerstone of our brand and our product. And the reality is, it truly is, because if they weren't making that product, and I mean, I guess we've been in this long enough to know it's very hard for a factory to make this product, and almost not just because of the construction and welt joints and make sure they're clicking the leather correctly and everything else, but it's also like, it's a nightmare, the stuff we're making, because it's like, hey, here's 18 pair of this with, a navy suede from CF Stead from England. But you know what? We want to do 48 pair of this with a snuff suede from CF Stead from England. And it's going to be literally one pair per size. I mean, it's like a joke, how bad it is to make something like that. And from a factory's perspective, I mean, most factories wouldn't even entertain such a thing. And that includes North American factories, right? I mean, that is, these are so complicated as far as just how small the runs are and the materials that we're bringing in. Not to mention, we're a total pain to our partners who are these tanneries, because we're always like, hey, can we slide by this minimum this time? Because we want to do some spring colors and a tassel and a penny loafer. And it's like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, we still have to make the leather. Like, we can't make, 10 hides of leather. We still have a drum to use here. So it's like, there's so much that goes into that, where you're kind of always on that edge of, it's difficult for everyone, those smaller quantities, it truly is. And so, and I think, I guess that's why that space isn't that large, the niche of Goodyear welted shoes at this price point. There aren't too many brands and things, just because the volume play, especially at a certain price point, I mean, it just doesn't even exist, so you're living in this different set of volume that you're always having to hold on to some leather. You're always having to do this. And, we can't do this one because we have to order 96 pairs of outsoles and, Vibram or this and that. We have to order a batch. We're going to have 48 left over, and that's the smallest quantity we can get. I mean, it's just literally across the board, right? So I think, the factory being able to not only make the shoes, but then manage the complexity of just the mix of styles and leathers and stuff, and then go, and we'll do this year round, year after year after year. It's really difficult, and it requires that special partner to be like, okay, we're going to do this with you guys, knowing that, it's a nightmare. It's not here's 15 styles with, 4,000 pairs each. Like, it's a truly a unique little scenario. But I think that they enjoy living in that space as well. Once we have a program set and it's running, we kind of set up the guardrails of how do we do that with the minimums and materials, and how do we use it up on the next purchase order and things like that. It works. It's just a little bit different type of business,
Yeah, it sounds like it's been a really long and eventful journey from the time that you went to visit China and spend a few days just to check out what they were doing there. And I'm curious now, how much time are you spending over in Asia or over in Europe, and where you're getting your inspiration for design and innovation and style? Where is that coming from?
So we kind of do both. I mean, so from the manufacturing standpoint, I go there once or twice a year, usually to China and in Taiwan, and for example, we're actually taking the whole family. My wife, a lot of her family's still in central China, and so we'll usually go and bring the kids. Like my daughter's 7 years old. I think she's been 7 times, type of thing, to China to go back and see family, and then also we'll spend some time in Xiamen. So it kind of is a good little trip for us, every year, doing it that way when it comes to the, shaman and the factory itself. And for like inspiration and things, I mean, it was easier back then when I was living in China because, me and the factory owner, we would take little trips to Tokyo, and you were so close. I mean, even Milan's closer and things like that. So, I think I still try to do that. Even last year, went to Tokyo in the fall time, more or less just to get out and to see things. We live in Southwest Michigan, and so there's a lot of shopping nearby. Even honestly, even like Chicago is pretty tough. There's not a lot in our space necessarily. You can definitely get some inspiration from the typical go into the Ralph Lauren store and look at their accessories and kind of look at and see what's going on. But I think, yeah, I always enjoy Tokyo for that. Same thing, Milan has the Linea Pelle once a year, or I guess twice a year for the leather show.
Mhm.
And so we'll usually break away for a day or two, with a friend that I'll go with over there and go kind of shoe shopping and go see some things. Yeah, so try to stay relevant, try to keep, seeing what's going on outside of what we're doing as well through those few trips every year.
Right. So Wyatt, as we close out this conversation, I want to ask you you vaguely kind of referenced some of the challenges that we've been seeing as an industry, to be honest with you, over the last couple of years. They've been actually quite cumbersome, just if we're all being honest with each other. But what do you expect? Like, how are you feeling about 26 in the next year or two relative to the business? I know right now it's kind of hard to plan that out no matter what company you are in the space, but you source from China. Clearly there's been a lot of movement out of China from an industry perspective. In fact, last year, China had its lowest volume of footwear exports to the U.S. market since 1991, which I was in high school at the time. So how are you feeling about business? You're obviously committed to it. That's part of the brand's DNA. What do you expect for business over the next year or two?
I always want to be like optimistic, but yeah, I don't think I am, for the next couple of years. It just doesn't seem, there's so much going on, and I think, of course, yeah, we were living day by day in 25 with the tariffs. I think we had 3 months that we asked the factory to hold on to shoes and didn't ship, when things were at the all-time highs of the 125, and then, whatever these percentages were above 50% for a couple months on end. While that tariff portion of it and the type of tariff they're using, it seems to have kind of gone to the wayside, and now they're using this other one until maybe, what is it, June or July?
Yeah.
I'm not really holding my breath that they're not going to find some other way to, especially considering we're in China, that, things are just going to be smooth after this, so I don't really know, other than we're just trying to be as conservative as possible, and really have been for the last 2 years, just because, I mean, as soon as one chapter ends, it's like the next one's even worse almost, and it's like, I don't know, just trying to be as conservative as we can from a purchasing standpoint, from expenses standpoint, from marketing, just knowing that it's consistently gotten more complicated, I guess, over the last 4 years. And now with whatever's happening today, it doesn't, I guess the one thing we haven't had in 4 or 5 years is truly, even just a general kind of market drop, when it comes to maybe that 2020, financial, I guess there was a blip there for a little while, but, yeah, no one seems to be overly optimistic right now. And so I'm just kind of like, yeah, how can we just be careful, because it doesn't seem like things make a whole lot of sense. So I'm not too sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, that's the most honest answer we probably ever had gotten on the podcast, because I'd be like, oh, everything's going to be fine. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's, the consumer's resilient. 2025 sales were okay, but you're right. It's been kind of just the uncertainty of how to plan around this. And my hope is, with the president going to Beijing next month in May. We're recording this in April. And then with the ceasefire in place, at least until November, that we will be in an okay spot with our relationship with China. It's still, for all like the dramatic movement away from China, still our number one provider easily by multiple percentage points. So it's an important relationship for us. And the fact that you're committed to that and continue to make great product out of China, it just shows you how important as a economy that we have 99% import penetration. We bring in 2.5 billion pairs a year to the consumer. Being able to have the opportunity to source great product from places like China is really critically important to our industry. And so kudos to you and to your family and to all the hard work that's been poured into it, because I know it's a lot of work, but you have great product and you should be very proud of it.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So folks, you can go to grantstoneshoes.com. That's grantstoneshoes.com to see all the product we've been talking about, read some of the stories, some of the blog posts that we've been discussing, and buy a couple great pairs of shoes because they're phenomenal. And thank you for joining us for this conversation today, because it is just another example of how we are doing these deep dives into conversations with key businesses within our footwear community. There's a ton of great companies, and Wyatt is just another example of a generational family that's poured a lot into our industry. So it's an awesome opportunity for us to highlight this. You can go to shoeandshow.com for all of our episodes. Make sure you subscribe and spread the word. And until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.